All right. Sonny, you want to get us started tonight?
Sure will. First of all, thank you for coming. This is a wonderful group of teachers helping teachers, basically. And we're here to just share what we know and make our kids or coach our kids to be better writers. And so Jim is going to get our PowerPoint, our presentation together. Our presider tonight will be responsible for all of the links that you will find in the chat as well as in, I like to call it the little file cabinet there. Okay, so this is Coaching Your Students to Become Better Writers with Asani Charles and Jim Wick.
Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone.
You see our graphics. As I said, all the links that you need will be available in the presentation. So if you're watching this later on, you can click on that hyperlink and you'll have the presentation. They'll also be in the chat and in the file cabinet. That's not what it's called, but that's what I'm calling it. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Asani Charles. I'm an AP English language teacher and writing coach at John Horn High School in Mesquite, Texas. I'm also a College Board AP English Literature reader, and this next part is a mouthful. I am an AP English Language and Literature instructional coach for National Math and Science Initiative, otherwise known as NMSI. I am blessed to have taught both elementary and middle school in addition to high school, and I am an avid college softball mom who enjoys traveling to our daughter's softball travel game, road games, with my husband. That was a mouthful.
And
Jim?
your daughter plays softball for Iowa State, is that correct?
Yes, she plays softball for Iowa State. They had a major tornado today.
Crazy.
It's a funny pun. Cyclone hit the cyclone.
Funny, but not funny.
Yeah, not
if you're
funny.
in the middle
She's
of it.
fine.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I am Jim Wicks, and I am an AP English Lit teacher at Dalton High School in Dalton, Georgia. I am entering my 20th year teaching in the teaching profession. All 20 years have been at Dalton High School, and I'm entering my 14th year as an AP Lit teacher. I also serve as the co-lead for our department there, the Language Arts Department. I have been the boys goalkeeper coach for our soccer team for what will now be 20 years. We've been very fortunate over the years to have quite a lot of success, fortunately. And then I've also served as an AP reader for the last 5 years, which in my mind is probably one of the greatest single professional development experiences I've ever been able to be a part of. And then one of the second best thing in my mind is also being an AP mentor, teaching new AP teachers, sort of showing them the ropes and sort of best practices for teaching your AP kids. So that's who I am. So let me talk a little bit about where this idea for our presentation came from. It started really with years of reading essays that at the reading and in the classroom that just don't address the prompt. What we see all too often is the idea of is more summary than analysis, telling us as the readers what the passage is about in terms of just giving us a summary of it, rather than looking at how the author has created our understanding of the situation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We don't get students digging nearly enough into the complexity of the passage. So many times they don't even see it. They read it at surface level. And part of that is because they don't really have a schema. They don't have a plan for how to dig into the complexity of the passage. And that's really where this came from. It's the result of maybe probably frustration, but also, in my mind, a coaching background, understanding how to break things down into smaller parts so that it is more accessible to the student. and that is why I think this process works. Part of the reason that it works is because it allows you to walk the students through what it takes to improve as writers in a sort of step-by-step way. It also takes the task of writing, of addressing a difficult prompt and a difficult passage, and it breaks it down into manageable steps that focus on the basics of writing, and it allows you to build from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. It really, one of the great things about this process is it allows you to see growth in your students' writing as they move throughout the year. And part of that is because it helps them gain a deeper understanding of what the expectations are. You'll see as we go through this that we really sort of dig into and unpack, if you will, the expectations of the scoring guide, the language of the scoring guide. And the more that they can digest that, the more that it sort of becomes a part of their writing psyche, it fosters a mindfulness of those expectations throughout the year and in the students as they write their essays. And then you can begin to see that transfer of knowledge when students can take their understanding of the rubric and not only apply it to their writing, but also to their peers' writing, and that sort of self-reflection and peer reflection. So there aren't a lot of things that you need, but as Asani said at the beginning, everything that you need, we have given you either in hyperlinks, and I think Susan will be sharing a Word document that has the links to everything. So really what you need is you need a copy of the prompt. You can do this with Q1, Q2, or Q3. It's sort of universally transferable in that way. You need a copy of the scoring guide. And then you need copies of samples. We put on here the 2019 samples because that's really kind of what we're going to be focusing on. Specifically the 2019 Q2 sample, and Sonny will talk about that in a second. But you could do this with any of the 2019 samples or the 2018 samples that have all been rescored using the new scoring guide.
And I'll talk about the process and how this works. Step 1, familiarize yourself with the language of the scoring guide. For those of us who have experience and love the 9-point scoring guide, it's gone. And it's gone. Yeah, it's gone. So you want to familiarize yourself first with it so that you can transfer that knowledge to the kids, because we want them to become familiar with it. As a matter of fact, when kids come to me for tutoring or they want an explanation as to why they got whatever score they got, I make sure that they have the rubric or the scoring guide right in front of them. And I'll ask them, walk me through it and show me where your score is reflected in the descriptors on the scoring guide. So the first thing you want to do is you familiarize yourself with it and then make sure that the kids are familiar. So as a step, make sure that you have copies of the scoring guides so that you can distribute that to them.
And here is a look at those scoring guides that we are referencing in case you are unfamiliar. Sorry, my mouse is stuck. Technical difficulties. All right, you want me to leave these up for you, Asani, as you talk through, or you want me to go back?
Yeah, let's go back, and then we'll show these again.
Okay.
So what's really important is that you have students go row by row with each of the 3 scoring guides. You want them to look at similarities in the language, but you also want them to highlight those similarities, but don't also forget that there's some changes in them. So also have them look at what changes from point to point in each row. The reason we do this is to show our students that regardless of the type of essay they're writing, the expectations are always the same. So yeah, let's now go back to the scoring guide.
Okay.
So what we want them to notice is that the language for the more desired scores are pretty much the same because the expectations are the same. And here's something else I'll tell you. The rubrics between and AP Lit are very similar. Literally, the expectations are pretty much the same thing. And that's good to know, because if your kids had AP language last year, hopefully they're already familiar with the rubric. And now they'll just get a chance to see, well, what's changing now that I'm looking at fiction and not rhetoric.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point, Asani. And it should really make this whole process for all of those kids who are coming from AP language, it should make the process that much easier and that much smoother. You want to talk about the transition from the poetry to, say, the prose?
Right. Let's see if I can.
Can you see it?
Okay. Right. So let's look at row A. To get that first point for the argument or the thesis, respond to the prompt with a thesis that presents a defensible interpretation of the poem. You're going to see that language on all three. Obviously, the Q2 will say the prose passage, and then the Q3, the open question, will be more prompt related, or usually the Q3, it has to do more with elements of plot. But what we're looking for in all three is that defensible interpretation. Yeah, so Q3, the argument question, or the 1 point, is response to the prompt with a thesis that presents a defensible interpretation of the selected work. So that's what we're looking for, that defensible interpretation, that defensible thesis. Basically, is there evidence in the text to support the claim?
And then what about row B? What are we looking at, Asani, here in row B in terms of maybe similarities and differences?
Look, every column but 0 has commentary. But what happens is it's the complexity of that commentary that makes all the difference. So if we start at the end, 0 points. When a student simply restates the thesis, if there is one, or repeats provided information or offers information that's irrelevant to the prompt, we as readers have already decided that there's nothing to award. So if there's no commentary, there's no evidence that relates to the prompt, that's that category. But things start to change when we get to 1 point. Provides evidence that is mostly general and commentary. Now here's where the old 9.4 comes into play. Right. Summarizes the evidence, but does not explain how the evidence supports the student's argument. Right. So there's some general evidence, but there's no support of the argument. But the student will still get 1 point for that.
Oh, that's a really good point right there too, Asani. And it goes back to the whole idea of establishing this thesis statement, right? Is that right. There may be some sort of evidence that will earn them 1 point, but it's not working in defense of their interpretation of whatever the piece is, right?
Exactly. So when we look in the next column, now things are getting a little bit more detailed. Provide some specific relevant evidence. I would have my kids annotate, highlight, circle, put a box around the terms specific and relevant. Because some of our kids think they're not summarizing if they give us any type of evidence. But if that particular evidence has nothing to do with the prompt, you're just telling me something somebody said. Also look at the commentary. It's more detailed than the first two. Explains how some of the evidence relates to the student's argument, but no line of reasoning is established, or the line of reasoning is faulty. What's key here is that even if a student has specific relevant evidence and stretches a little bit in their explanation of that evidence in the commentary, they'll still get 2 points in that row.
Yeah, I think also the establishment of, and this is you'll get into this in just a second, but this idea of a line of reasoning, it's just not there yet. It's not working in defense of their interpretation. We don't see the establishment of their argument.
It's almost like extra.
Yeah, yeah. which gets us into the 3 and the 4. And so when you start looking at the 3 and the 4, Asani, what are the things that sort of, and again, you'll see this with your students, the similarity, whether we're talking about the prose, or we're talking about the poetry, or we're talking about Q3, the literary argument, the language is pretty much the same. So what is it that we see in terms of the big jump from 2 to 3 and then maybe 3 to 4?
Well, definitely when we get to 3, the line of reasoning has been established.
Right.
I like looking at this in terms of, I tell my kids, watch how the columns grow. So point 3, you get 3 points for providing specific evidence as opposed to some specific evidence. Provide specific evidence to support all claims in the line of reasoning. And here's the commentary. It explains how some of the evidence supports a line of reasoning and explains how at least one literary element or technique in the poem, in the prose passage, contributes to the meaning.
So there is some level of conversation in a 3 about the impact of whatever the literary element, literary technique is going to be on our understanding of their interpretation of the prompt, their interpretation of the passage.
And a little bit later, we'll talk about what question that is. I always have kids look for what, how, and effect, and that comes up in just a few minutes. And then, of course, when we get to the 4, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, and so what separates the 3 from the 4 here?
Well, if we look here, the word that really stands out, if you look under commentary, is consistently. Consistently explains how the evidence supports a line of reasoning. This is a student who understands very well the piece that they're analyzing, that they have a plan. They've come into the work knowing how they're going to assess what's being said, what's written. And then look at the commentary after that, and explains how multiple literary elements. So they're not just looking at one. But I will say this. There have been many times when I've awarded a poetry essay upper half, even with the new upper half. Even though they used maybe 1 or 2 elements, they were consistently with it. Okay. And that's I forgot to.
No worries whatsoever. While Asani's away, I'm going to comment on 2 things on this. I think consistently explains. So when we used to use the 9-point rubric, one of the things that I would do, somebody, when I first started teaching, I don't know if I got it at a summer institute, but they gave me, or it was somebody on the listserv, but it was this food rubric, the 9-point food rubric. And it had, it described all of the essays in terms of types of meat, with a 9 being a filet mignon. And one of the things that I talked about it demonstrates this point. When you eat a filet, from the first bite to the last bite, it is the same level of consistent meat. It's the same level of perfection. And when you start getting down to like the 7, I think the 7 was described as a ribeye, it's a great steak, but it's not the same level of consistency of meat because you've got all these little bits of fat. And I think that's one of the things that sort of separates maybe the 4 from the 3 on this new rubric, this new scoring guide, is from the beginning to the end, everything is working in conjunction and in defense of that interpretation of the piece. The other observation that I would make, especially coming out of this last year's reading, and this is something I talked to my kids a little bit about going into the reading, was going from one literary technique to multiple literary techniques. What I found, and Asani, you may not have experienced the same thing, but what I found was that when kids chose to focus on really developing their understanding of how 2 literary techniques worked in defense of their interpretation of the piece, they did much better job than trying to find a 3rd one, because so often that 3rd one would come up a little bit flat.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was a question of time, maybe it was a question of understanding. And that was one thing I really took away from this year's reading, and decided that when we go back, that's going to be what I'm going to have my students do, is really try to focus on really developing their understanding of how two things work in the passage.
Two good ones.
Yeah, because then
Right.
you get it.
So I'm a pitcher's mom, and I think that's part of the reason why Susan billed me as a softball coach. The term that I came up with my kids is, please don't pitch terms at me where you're just simply saying there's this in there and there's that in there, but you're really not going anywhere with it. More is not, less is more in that regard. And so, yeah, if a student can be consistent with two, it will get them there.
All right, you want to let's go back to this. I think we've moved through. Let's go on to the next part. Talk to us a little bit about, introduce us to the idea of breaking down the prompt. What does that mean?
I like to think of breaking down the prompt as dissecting a prompt, cutting it in half. One of the things that we've been trained as AP teachers is that there are 2 questions in every AP English essay question. And again, this is something that they should be used to coming out of AP Lang, because there's 2 questions in that question too, and those questions too. So what's important is that we have some task analysis, because this is what I've learned, is that our kids know how to read and they know how to write. But what they don't know how to do, unless we teach them, is to break down the required tasks. And one of the things I noticed from this year's reading, and I'm going to hope that the reason why I saw this a lot is because kids maybe felt disconnected from their teachers, but I read a lot of summaries. It was almost like everything we've taught them all year long, they just kind of pushed off to the side, feeling overwhelmed by having to take an exam online, feeling overwhelmed by having to take an exam at home with all the distractions that are there. And now we have these AP caliber college material in front of us, and I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to tell you what I think it's about instead of answering the prompt. So we have these 3 bullets. The first one is, what exactly does the task require students to do? They have to read through the wording of the task, and most importantly, they have to understand the task, or in some cases, tasks, plural. Mm-hmm. One way to address this is to get the students to think about the task, not as a statement, but as a question, getting back to those 2 questions in every prompt. To do this, have them figure out the what and the how of the prompt.
So let's talk about what what we mean by the what and the how. One of the things that's great about the AP prompt, and you'll see this when we're going to look at a prompt here in just a second, is that the language, even before this year, when they really sort of have made a concerted effort to keep the language consistent, the language has always really been consistent. Q1 prompts are almost always the same. There's the first sentence that introduces the title of the piece and the author, and gives you a general idea of the prompt of the passage, and then you've got another statement that sort of highlights what it is you're supposed to do. So the what of the prompt, to me, in my estimation, always has to do with some sort of relationship. Sometimes, whether it's a poem, it may be the relationship between the speaker and music, or the speaker and memories, or sometimes the way that music and memories are intertwined in the speaker's mind. But it's always sort of about that relationship. Or it might be about the relationship between 2 characters in a story, in a prose passage, or it might be the relationship between a character and society, a character and setting. But it always has to do with the relationship aspect, and that is the what. And then the how is really more about this is where we get into the literary analysis aspect of the assignment, of the task. And that has to do with the author's use of language. So once we've established the what is the character's relationship to the urban setting, to go back to the old Anne Petrie passage from using the street. Then you get into the how. And so this gets to how does the author use language to give us a better understanding of that relationship? How is our understanding of that relationship affected by the author's use of language? This is the prompt that we will be sort of using as our point of reference today. It's the 2019 Q2 prompt. And this is what I was talking about just a second ago. So your prompt is generally going to be 3 sentences long. This one is, we'll just read it. Carefully read the following excerpt from William Dean Howells' novel, The Rise of Silas Lapham. Is that correct? Did I say that right? Silas Lapham?
Lapham.
Oh, okay.
It's probably Lapham.
Okay. What we see in this first sentence is the author, the title of the work, and a point of reference in terms of time period, which can be very important because it helps some students sort of gauge their predispositions towards language. Then, in a well-constructed essay, analyze how the author portrays the complex experience of the 2 sisters, Penelope and Irene, within their family and society. Here's where we're starting to get into the what. This is our task. What is it that the prompt needs us to do? We need to look at the experience of the 2 sisters. What is that experience of the 2 sisters, both within their family and in society? And really, it's almost sort of implied also towards one another. And then the final sentence is where you get into your how. You may wish to consider such elements, literary elements as style, tone, and selection of detail. This is where we get into that author's use of language. So what we're going to do is we're going to reword the prompt into 2 questions. For this particular prompt, the what question would be, what is the complex experience of the 2 sisters, Penelope and Irene, within their family and society? The thing that I love about this process, especially this first step, is that it is something that the kids can absolutely take ownership of. If you will, it really becomes rote. Like, you give them a prompt, you tell them to break it down into the 2 questions, and the more you practice this, the easier it becomes. And then they can begin to sort of think about, all right, now how do I answer those 2 questions? One thing you'll notice that we did on this is we bolded the word complex, because there's always that element of complexity that you really want to make sure that that you focus on. My kids and I, we talk about the idea of complexity. What does that mean? That means there are multiple facets to it. It's not straightforward. It's not something that can be easily defined. That's what makes writing about this difficult. That's why writing a summary won't work. And so that's a conversation that you definitely want to have with your kids. Just what does it mean to be complex? And then your how question for this particular prompt is, how does the author use literary techniques to develop our understanding of their experience? Once you've gotten them to a point where they can do this on their own, then they can begin to take ownership of the next step of the writing process. So the way that you want to progress with this, after you've had them, reword the prompt into 2 questions. I find that it is better to sort of take them a question at a time, especially early on, to get them to be able to digest the passage in chunks. And that's really kind of what this whole process is about, making it manageable, especially at the beginning, so that by the time we get to May, all of this is second nature. So what you want to do is you want to have your students read through the passage and just do a quick write where they answer just question 1, just the what. Get their understanding of the relationship, in this case, the relationship between the sisters, the relationship of the sisters to their family, the relationship of their sisters to society. What does that look like? What is their understanding of that relationship? And At this point, you don't need to address the author's use of language, but we're going to get to that in just a second. And then you want to have a conversation. So what I do is I will have them write, give them 10 minutes, especially at the beginning, to sort of write a quick response to this question, to the what. And then have them partner up and have them talk about it. Okay, this is the way I interpreted their relationship. And so have them share as partners, and then maybe have two sets of partners come together in a group of four, and then everybody shares their understanding of the relationship. And then that can lead to an entire class conversation of a variety of interpretations, which is fine, which is absolutely fine. But I think it's really important that you have this conversation before you get to the next step, the looking at the how we came to that understanding, so that everybody's sort of on the same page in terms of their understanding of the passage. Because if you've got students who just completely misinterpret, this is a very safe environment for them to do that. But it also allows you to sort of redirect, and really it allows you to take the next step, which is examining, okay, this is how I know. I can go back to the passage now, I can annotate, I can look at specific uses of language and see how we've come to this understanding. Why the passage reinforces what we've talked about. Which takes us to step 4. And Asani, you're going to talk to us a little bit about how we now go about annotating with that what and how in mind.
Right. The step 3 is so important because what it does is it builds confidence to go to the next step. I know that I'm not the only teacher who has a problem with kids annotating. And so if I have to teach annotation every single year until I retire, which is how many years? I don't know. I think it's 6, and I can't do that. Anyway, if I have to teach annotation every year, so be it.
Absolutely.
What we don't want kids to do is write whatever. We don't want that. We want them to be intentional. And if they've gone through these steps 1 through 3, they've discussed the prompt, they discussed the passage with their partners, they should be able to target their annotation directly to the prompt, because that's how they can ensure they address the prompt when they write their essay and not summarize. Yep. So this is why I start with, you want to revisit step 2, making sure that every single person understands what the what and the how are. That way students can now leverage their understanding of what and how. That's my alarm. It's life, right? They can leverage their understanding of the what and the how to target their annotation with the prompt in mind. So as students annotate, they have 3 questions, and I mentioned these earlier, on their mind. That is what, how, and what is the effect? What did the writer say? What did the writer say about the relationship? What is the writer saying about theme, a statement about life? Whatever the what in the prompt is, I actually have my kids write the what on their papers so that they can see it. How did the writer say it? We know that's going to be about literary elements. Now College Board is saying literary choices, literary devices. We know that's the mechanism to get to the message, right? And then here's the question. A lot of kids ask me this year, I want that sophistication point. Well, the way you get that sophistication point is when you are accurate and consistent with the effect of that literary device. Why did the writer choose a metaphor to describe the character's experience as a turtle's trick or whatever, right? Yeah. So you're not just term pitching, you're telling me the effect of it. The writer does this in order to do that. Okay.
Yeah. Asani, one of the things that I do with this is that it's very similar to what you're talking about. I just tell them to annotate with purpose. Like, I don't need you to mark up the entire page. Right. You don't really have time to do that. I need
Yeah.
you to make sure that you are marking things, and we've talked about this before, marking, and I think you're going to come to this in just a second, but mark things that ultimately help you understand that what, so that when you come to write your essay, your annotations are sort of your outline for how you do this.
That's it.
I'll let you
That's
talk
it
about that.
exactly. That is
I'll let you
it
talk about that.
exactly. I always show my kids my books, and they're like, "What is all that?" Oh, these are discussion questions. These are your Socratic questions. These are your essay questions. You know, can we look a little bit closer? I'm like, no. The point is, everything I'm writing is intentional to get to that essay.
Right.
Let's look at the next slide.
So
Here we have sample stations. If you click on this image, you'll see. Let's not go to it just yet.
oh, sorry.
If you click on that image, you'll see this picture of a page from Gatsby blown up. I want to go over the questions really quickly, and then we'll look at the page. So the first question is, what did the writer say? And in this situation, the student has focused on a peculiar phrase that describes Gatsby. Gatsby shouldered the mattress and started for the pool. The student annotates, why shoulder? It's an air mattress. Now let's go ahead and click on it.
Okay. Oh, sorry. My mouse got stuck again. There we go. Let me see if I can zoom in. Yeah.
Thank you.
There we go.
Okay, so you see I put a little question mark there. Gatsby shouldered the mattress and started for the pool. Once he stopped and shifted it a little, the chauffeur asked him if he needed help, but he shook his head and in a moment disappeared among the yellowing trees. That doesn't make any sense. He's going to put this mattress, which is made of plastic and air, in the pool and lay on it. He doesn't need help with it. So we have to ask ourselves, why does Fitzgerald portray this scene this way? Now, our bright kids, I like to say my preacher's kids, they're going to figure out what this is the minute they read that. Everybody else, not so much, but that's okay. Asking the text, why use the shoulder? It's an air mattress. Is already making that student focus on the what and the how, and they'll get to the effect. We learn a little bit more in the next paragraph. No telephone message arrived, but the butler went without his sleep and waited for it until 4 o'clock, until long after there was anyone to give it to if it came. I have an idea that Gatsby himself didn't believe it would come, and perhaps he no longer cared. If that was true, he must have felt that he had lost the old warm world, paid a high price for living too long with a single dream. He must have looked up at the unfamiliar sky through frightening leaves and shivered as he found what a grotesque thing a rose is, and how raw the sunlight was upon the scarcely created grass. A new world, material without being real, where poor ghosts.
Oh, she froze.
Rash and fantastic figure gliding toward him through the amorphous trees. I can't read today. Now, it's a good chance that they're not going to get that this is a biblical allusion in that paragraph. But when they keep going, they'll definitely see it. So let's go back to the slide.
Okay.
So how did the writer say it? Reading further and questioning the text, the student recognizes a biblical allusion. So then, what's the effect? What I like about this example is the student can literally jump to the effect in their polished sentence. Fitzgerald portrays Gatsby as a Christ figure when Gatsby shouldered the mattress and moments later sacrifices his own life to save Daisy. Now everything makes sense. It makes sense that the chauffeur would ask him, hey, do you need help carrying your cross? And we get there by having them practice with those 3 questions. What did the author say? How did the author say it? And what is the effect of how they chose to say it?
Awesome. All right, let's take a look at the next slide here.
Am I doing this one too?
Yeah, I think this is you.
Okay. Right.
Sorry.
That would be the pause. Okay, so now we're going to it takes all time. All right, so now we're going to take that sample and apply it to we said it was Lapham, the
Yeah.
Lapham passage. Notice how the Q2 annotations focus on what is complex about the sisters' relationship with themselves and society. This is intentional. We do not want kids wasting precious time writing notes about anything. We want them to target their annotations to the prompt. This prevents tangent, off-topic talk in the essay. The annotations that you're going to see in these files here are a result of steps 1 through 3.
Sonny, let me just say for a second that I love the fact that you on this slide included this sentence. This prevents tangent, off-topic talk in their essay. I think it reiterates the importance of, and we joked about this a little bit already, but it really reiterates the importance of teaching good annotation from the beginning, and
Right.
teaching kids to annotate with purpose, to not just mark up every time they see alliteration or every ounce of imagery in a passage, because it's not just enough, right?
Right.
They have to be able to provide that commentary on why it's important. What's the effect? Why did the author use, like in the example that you just chose, shouldered the mattress, right? This Christ reference.
Right.
All right, so let me click on you ready for me to click on these files?
Please do, sir.
Okay. All right, and I'll let you talk about what we've got here.
Okay, so the first page is a clean sample of the 2019 passage, because all teachers want a clean sample of something. So you now have it. And then the second page is me pretending to be a student, but of course I'm always a student. You'll see at the top, I did what I teach my students to do, to write what the what is and write what the how is. So as they are annotating, they are intentionally targeting, they're looking for the what and the how. And so in this case with the Lapham passage, the what is complex about the sisters. Let's just read the prompt again. Carefully read the following excerpt. Then, in a well-constructed essay, analyze how the author portrays a complex experience of two sisters, Penelope and Irene. So, the what in this case is the complex experience of the two sisters within their family and within society. I like this prompt because a lot of kids would miss that the complexity has to do with two things and not just one. And so when we make them write out what is, they are more likely to capture, I can't just look for the complex experience. I have to look at the complex experience within their family and their experience with society.
Let me just say also within that, because I think this is a point that I try to make with my kids, and Susan Barber and I have also talked about this. It's that shift. If you can get your kids to figure out where's the shift in the poem, where's the shift in the passage, it will help them sort of unearth that complexity.
Right.
To see that there's something going on at the beginning, and then there's going to be a change at some point. And when you recognize that change, then you begin to see how this passage is complex.
Right.
So go ahead.
And before going on, a tip I always tell my kids: when you see the word complexity or complex in the Q1, which is the poetry, or the Q2, which is the prose, always expect a change.
Absolutely.
Someone or something is going to be different. Whatever it looks like at the beginning is going to be different by the time you get to the end.
Yep. Absolutely.
So what I have here, I always tell my kids to annotate every 5 lines. Write something down every 5 lines that addresses those 3 questions. What, how, and what's the effect? And what I found myself doing was I did a lot of what. I didn't do too much effect. But that makes sense I didn't do too much how, but that makes sense because one of the suggestions is selection of detail. And so in this passage, we have a lot of selection of detail. And then when I got towards the end, I found myself noticing the tone. And what I thought was really interesting is the tone that the speaker takes regarding these two sisters. But if you look, you'll see that I'm doing a lot of what the writer is saying about their relationship within their family and with society. Let's go to the next. And so here we have sample GG. This scored a 5.
Yes.
And what I want you to get from that is when you are going through the essays with your kids, and you've already established, well, this is the score, and this is what you have to write to get that score, then you want to show them a sample and say, where do we see the 5 based on what we know from the rubric, the scoring guide, based on what we know what the student did or must have done with their annotations? Where do we see that here? So that's why that's provided for you there.
Okay.
And then
we also
the last one should be, the last one is the commentary.
Right. And then we'll sort of reference those two things here as we move forward.
Right.
Okay. And that's all of the Lapham files. Okay. So the next step in this process, after you have had your students respond in a quick write to the what of the prompt, you've had small personal conversations, you've had whole class conversations about coming to an understanding of that what, and then you've gone back and you've had them now annotate with purpose. And again, as you begin to implement this process in the beginning of the year, you may need to teach them those annotation skills. You may need to show them what that looks like. It's maybe a little bit more difficult digitally, but I would encourage you to do what Asani has done here, and that is annotate with purpose yourself, and then upload the file so that you can show it to them, and then also walk them through. This is what I was thinking as a reader as I was reading this passage, because the more that they can sort of see passages the way that we see passages, I think the better off they'll probably be, the better understanding of it that they'll have. So what you want to do is there are a number of ways you can take this. You can go ahead and give them a full packet of essays where they've got a couple of 5s. I think, in fact, let me just click on this and I'll just show you the packet that I'm referring to. This packet, when I get to the scoring commentary, has a number of essays ranging all the way from 1 to 5. You can use the full packet for the purposes of introducing this process. I would probably just focus on the upper levels, and we'll sort of explain how that works or what we mean by that here in just a second. And then you're going to go back to the rubric that we've sort of already, at this point, they've already walked through all of those comparisons. Asani, go ahead and say what.
You froze a few seconds ago.
Okay, how far?
So can you go back to the last slide you were on?
This one?
I
hadn't changed slides yet.
Okay, because you just.
Just
start over.
I was just talking.
We heard you say distribute a packet of essays.
Okay.
And then you just kind of froze.
Okay, so you want to go ahead and you can distribute a full packet of essays for the purposes of this activity, or you can just take the upper level essays. It may work in terms of time. It may work better as you're starting off, because this is and this is one of the things we'll talk about at the end, it's a time-consuming process. It's totally worth it, but it does take time. But you may want to just start with the upper level essays so you can sort of show them what that looks like, and then maybe come back later as they begin to more fully digest the scoring rubric and take a look at, okay, so what's a 4 look like? What's a 3 look like?
Right.
And walk them through that process.
And I had a question to ask you.
Okay.
Is it just me, or do you see a broader spectrum for the new upper essays versus our tried and true? Like, there were 6s this summer
that were
that
not 9s.
no way would ever be 9s.
Yeah. No,
And
yeah,
I think
I felt the same way. And I had a conversation with a number of readers during the course of the reading about that. Like, I probably, over the course of that week, I probably had, I don't know, 3 essays that would have been a 9 on the old rubric.
Right.
But I had a good number of 6s, just because they, I think it's, the scoring is a bit more accessible to students than on the new scoring guide than maybe it was on the 9-point holistic rubric.
Right. And I think that's why teachers should feel comfortable sharing the upper half, the 5s and the 6s, because they're almost, well, they're better than the old 5s and 6s, but they're not 8s and 9s.
They're very attainable. Like, and that's one of the things that you want to do with this activity is show your students, this is somewhere, even if you're not there right now, this is somewhere you can probably get yourself to.
Exactly.
So what you want to do is you want to evaluate the top scoring essays using the scoring guide that we've already referenced, and just go sort of row by row to take a look at what constitutes good writing. You'll start with row A and ask them, let's go back and let's talk about, okay, so what is a defensible interpretation? One of the things that you may have to do is talk to your students about what's the difference between a claim and a fact. Like, you have to make some sort of argument in your defensible interpretation. You have to present an argument that you will eventually establish a line of reasoning for. And preferably, I tell my students to try to establish that in the beginning, because I know as a reader, if I'm trying to give you a score on an essay and I'm still trying to find your interpretation, defensible interpretation, and I'm in the last paragraph, it just makes the whole process of giving you a score a lot easier if you do that from the get-go.
Right.
The next thing that you can do with this is then have them go back to the paragraph that they wrote at the beginning and see if they can find a defensible interpretation of their own of their own. Did they create a defensible interpretation? Is there something that can be argued there? Or are they leaning already in the beginning, from the opening, are they leaning towards summary? Because more often than not, if you're just summarizing in the beginning, you're probably going to continue that throughout. And so you want to try to help coach them on, all right, so let's take a look at the 5, and here's the defensible interpretation. Notice how there's not summary, how this, it's creating a line of reasoning, it's creating an argument, and then it uses what happens in the passage to defend that argument. And so that's what you want to do with row A. What about row B? What do we want to do? What do we want to do here?
So row B looks at, I always tell my kids, remember, the lion's share of your points are going to come from row B. And that makes sense, because what good is an argument without any evidence and commentary? So what you'll do with row B is you want to look at what the readers are looking for in order to earn those 3 or 4 points. I'm one of those readers where if the student gives me a defensible argument or doesn't early on, I have already decided, okay, this essay is at least a this. And I'm looking to give them more points. And the way they get more points is by proving it in the middle. So what is a line of reasoning? Look for this in each of the essays. Is it there or is it not? How are the essays using evidence? Why is what evidence you chose important to establish reasoning? And then what is the commentary? How much commentary versus evidence is there? How is the essay organized? How many literary devices are discussed? did the student turn pitch and just give us everything and not link the devices to meaning? They didn't give me the purpose of the device, or they just listed them. So those are the things that we're looking for when we read. Now, I'm going to be going to you want me to go to sample GG?
Sure.
So,
let
let's pull that back up.
Let me back up for just a second.
So what we're going to do right now is look at the same 5 that I shared with you a few slides before, and look at the evidence and commentary that stands out, and that's sample GG.
That's right here. Let me just say, one of the things that I will have my students do as they're learning to evaluate their own writing with this process is I'll have them go through and either highlight or underline their evidence versus commentary. And I'll have them do the same thing on like sample GG, have them go through with a highlighter, evidence versus commentary, so that they can see how those things play out. And what they will find in their own writing so many times, especially at the beginning of the year, is they've got a lot of evidence, but not a lot of commentary, right? They've got all of these facts, but no discussion of how those things point us back to that defensible interpretation. And I think that's one of the things that we talk about with that establishing a line of reasoning. The thing that establishes or that helps people get that 3 and 4 range is that everything works in defense of that. Everything sort of keeps pointing back to, this is the overall point that I'm trying to make.
Right.
Go ahead.
And a good way to do that too is to make sure that you kids use different color highlighters, because then they can really see like, oh, wait a minute, I have a lot of this and hardly any of that.
They're like, oh crap.
Yeah. I just tell them, baby, you're just talking right now, but you haven't said anything.
Nobody does that.
Okay, so there were 3 lines of evidence and commentary that stood out for me when I was reading the student paper. I'm going to skip over the first paragraph because I know you wanted to talk about the defensible argument.
Yes.
If we look at paragraph 2, Howells utilizes imagery of the Lapham family. I'm going to get that family's name right. Howell, we're going to forgive you don't need the S, utilizes imagery of the Lapham family life to portray the insular and idealistic nature of family. For example, Howells describes the coordination of the girls and the mothers as taking long naps every day and sitting hours together, minutely discussing what they saw out of the window. This description set the image of 3 well-dressed, sequestered women who slept for long periods of time and simply stared out the window, talking about things. His description of them spending hours together and taking long naps makes them look unusually bonded and surprises the reader, given that the late 1800s, there was a lot occurring in society and work to be done. Rather than actively engaging with what is outside, the Laphams stared out the window and wanted in it. These kids, including passivity and the lack of readiness to engage with the world around them. Looking through a window is symbolic of the Laphams looking out at the world or life that they could not access or understand. Now, there's a lot of garbled in there, but the kid got the gist. Instead of being out in the world, engaging with the world and understanding the world, they are inside staring out and having conversations literally about things they really don't know because they're not interacting with the world. So that was one of the points that the commentary goes on to say that they were successful there. But there's also points where they just kind of mention stuff and don't really flesh it all the way out. And then I think that there's another one. Well, I had 2 of the quotes that I wanted to talk to you about were just in that paragraph. If you look at paragraph 4, I don't know why my cats decide to, I have two of them, why they decided to be vocal tonight. Uh, the girl's entire perspective of people and her entire mindset was entirely based off of two people, showing truly how narrow-minded the girl must be and the extent of her narrative. I love that because basically when she meets the guy later on, she then decides, well, I'll just study him and whatever he says, and that's going to be my opinion.
Yeah.
Her first opinions all being based off of her mother, and then the second after the beau she tries to court.
Right. You know, one thing, I want to go back to this paragraph, that the paragraph 2 where you were talking, because I think one of the things that I think is interesting here is that you really have, so here's your evidence, and it's specific evidence that is working in defense of, in establishing a line of reasoning. And then following that, you have, if you were doing highlighter, like this would be, evidence would be one color, and then you've got all of this commentary.
All of that commentary.
That is really developing their understanding of the significance of this particular line, which is really the reason that that this one is garnering the upper level score, is because it's specific evidence and well-developed commentary that is pointing us back to what pointing us back to ultimately their defensible interpretation, which you find right here in the opening sentence. The social world and the world of the family sit in opposition. I think that's fantastic. The tension between familial intimacy and inaccessibility of society organize their experience. That is a defensible interpretation. That characterizes the relationship of the girls both within their family and within society. And it leads us to this line of reasoning that is established throughout the rest of the piece. So let's talk. Let's see. Let's go back down here to C or to B. I think we covered all of that. The last thing that you want to take a look at is row C, and I think we probably owe it to our kids to have a conversation with them and be honest with them about the difficulty of attaining this last point. You know, it is difficult. It is difficult to get that complexity point. I had far more 5s than I did 6s this last year because there was lots of level of good commentary, but not necessarily, it didn't necessarily check the boxes for what you need to do to get that row C point. Let me see, it's open up here somewhere. I think this is it. Yeah. So I want to.
We need to remind kids that row C has several options.
Yeah, and that's
so, you know, don't think there's only one way to get that point.
Right, and that's actually what I was just going to talk about. The one thing that because you do have on every one of them, you've got these 4 different things that you can. It used to be the 8s and 9s were basically this: employing a style that is consistently vivid and persuasive, like just fantastic writing.
Like a writer.
Yeah. But there are so many other things. There are other things that you can do to try to get the sophistication point. Identify and explore complexities or tensions within the poem or the passage. Illuminate the student's interpretation by situating it within a broader context. And I think that's what, when you go back and you look at the sample that we just showed, that's what that particular student did, is they put it in this broader context. Accounting for an alternative interpretation of the passage of the poem. But I think, where is the language? All right, this last, it's italicized. This point should be awarded only if the sophistication of thought or complex understanding of is part of the student's argument, not merely a phrase or a reference. So you can't just bring it in your conclusion. Like, it's got to be part of what you're arguing from the beginning, really, to get this last point. Which I think is where we find the difficulty. Students want to try to just bring it in at the end, and that it's got to be part of their line of reasoning and part of their overall argument. What you may want to do in terms of utilizing this with your class is there are 2 5s in this packet, and one is a little bit more formulaic compared to the one that we just read that does get that sophistication point. You can walk them through both essays and tell them one got the sophistication point, one did not. Don't tell them which one. Let them figure it out on their own. Let them argue it out. And then once you've done that, you can sort of at that point take them to the commentary and take a look at what the readers saw and why they awarded GG a sophistication point over C that did not get it.
And GG is an example of how the exam is now more accessible to students, because there'll be some kids who'll say, he didn't even use an apostrophe when he should have. There's no way that this gets a sophistication point. And this make me tongue-tied. I couldn't get, there's too many, sweetheart, did the student take this to a deeper level? Yes, they did. And so that's why they got that point.
And they also need to understand, and I think as teachers need to help them understand that what they're writing the day of the exam is a rough draft. It's not perfect. It's not polished. Very few that we see will be that way.
Right.
Even on the old 9-point scale, that was one of the things that I always pointed out in the language of that was it need not be perfect.
Right.
It need not be without errors, I think was the language of it.
Right.
And they need to understand that this is a first go, and what we're really looking for is that depth of thought and how sophisticated are they as a thinker and as a writer.
Right.
So I guess that brings us really sort of to the end of this process. It is a process that in the classroom, it takes time, but I've found as I've sort of implemented this that giving them ownership of, first of all, the scoring guide, the language of the scoring guide, giving them ownership of this is what is expected of you. They begin to process that, and it begins to become a part of their writing psyche, and it really helps them see and understand more fully what it is they need to do. And using the samples, I think, helps them see that too. Any final thoughts, Asani, on how this works for you?
I've been thinking about this all day. A favorite, beloved former principal told us one day, when you teach more like a coach. And immediately I started thinking about every negative stereotype I could of coaches. Like, you want me to wear, shorts? What do you mean, teach like a coach? And what she said was, good coaches teach early. Whatever they want their team to learn how to do, whatever play they want them to learn to execute, they teach it early. And then once the kids have a grasp of it, they spend the rest of the season coaching. Why? Because coaches can't go into the game and play that role. Coaches have to be on the sideline. We're asking our kids to read, think, and write on a college level. And the game is at the end of the school year when they are there by themselves. The way we get them there is to teach them early and coach them throughout the season.
And the other thing is that good coaches, they teach their athletes the fundamentals, and they get them to a point where they can do the fundamentals without any help from them, without any guidance from them, because they've done it over and over and over, so that by the time, it's like you say, by the time they get to the game, the fundamentals take care of themselves and they can focus on just having fun and playing the game.
Right.
And that's what we want to get our kids to with May. We want our kids to be able to walk into the exam confident, knowing that they know how to do this, and that all they have to do is just do what we've done all year long.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess with that, at this point, we will start taking some questions from Susan. Let me stop this, and we will see what questions have arisen from the conversation.
Fire away.
Oh, hold on. Let me stop.